warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid in Mogadishu. Aidid has been blamed for an ambush that killed 23 UN peacekeepers earlier this month. The air and ground offensive began before dawn and was met with resistance from Somali militiamen. A UN official told Reuters news agency 5 peacekeepers were killed and 44 wounded, including 1 American. Somali casualties were also heavy. Aidid's compound was severely damaged, but the warlord escaped capture. Some of the UN fire hit civilian targets, killing or wounding a number of Somalis. In Washington, Defense Secretary Les Aspin explained the purpose of the operation. He spoke on Capitol Hill.
The purpose of the operation was really to get to the ability of Mr. Aidid to disrupt and to hamper the humanitarian efforts that are going on. Aidid was the person who really is the most difficult of the warlords. He was the one who had most responsible for the lack of delivery of supplies before the Americans got involved. He was the one who was the most intransigent in the discussions going on. And all of that was capped then by his attack and the ambush that he laid for the Pakistanis showed just a total disregard for the UN force.
We'll have more on this story right after the news summary.
The chief European mediator for Bosnia admitted today his peace plan was dead. Lord Owen urged the Muslim government to allow the republic to be split into 3 ethnic states, a plan proposed at peace talks yesterday in Geneva. Owen told reporters there the continuing fighting meant his plan was no longer an option.
The situation on the ground in Bosnia-Herzegovina has been deteriorating for some months, and it is necessary to look at anything which will provide a fair and a just peace.
Owen said the Serb, Croat, and Muslim leaders would meet again next week to discuss the new proposal. Secretary of State Christopher blamed Germany today for helping spark the Balkan conflict. He told reporters in Washington Germany's quick recognition of Croatian and Bosnian independence was a mistake.
The presidents of Russia and Ukraine today resolved their differences over the former Soviet Black Sea Fleet, agreeing to divide it into 2 separate navies. However, they failed to reach a deal on Ukraine's surrender of its former Soviet nuclear arsenal. We have a report narrated by Louise Bates of Worldwide Television News.
Despite having a major political crisis at home in Kiev, Ukraine's President Kravchuk spent the day in Moscow with Russian officials, soothing some of the long-running areas of dispute between the 2 countries. Russia wants Ukraine to sign the nuclear non-proliferation treaties. Yeltsin wants Ukraine to hand over former Soviet nuclear weapons on its territory. And Ukraine owes Russia a huge bill for oil supplies. But most immediately, the 2 countries have been trying for a year to agree on the division of the powerful Black Sea Fleet, which is based in the Ukraine's Crimea Peninsula. The 2 leaders now seem to have resolved this problem. They agreed to divide the 350-ship fleet in half. Russia will be allowed continued use of the Ukrainian port of Sevastopol, while the fleet's 70,000 servicemen will get temporary dual nationality. But the presidents failed to agree on Ukraine's wish to keep some of the nuclear warheads on its territory. A communique said Russia would give Kiev security guarantees if Ukraine gave them up, but only if it signed the START 1 and non-proliferation treaties. This falls way short of Kravchuk's position, and there was also no agreement to help Ukraine's desperate economy. Nevertheless, as he left for home, Kravchuk described Thursday's meeting as a breakthrough.
And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the new war in Somalia and the Senate tax compromise. We go first tonight to the fighting in Somalia. It is between the forces of the United Nations and those of Mohammed Farah Aidid, a warlord blamed for killing more than 20 Pakistani troops 2 weeks ago. UN forces made up of military units from several nations have been trying to flush out Aidid in Mogadishu and to confiscate the weapons stockpiled by his militias. So far, he has eluded capture. Our coverage begins with this report from Mogadishu by correspondent Jeremy Thompson of Independent Television News.
It was the heaviest attack so far. Aerial gunships launched a barrage of cannon and rocket fire, pounding the headquarters of militia leader General Aidid. Between the thunderous explosions, a loudspeaker message could be heard, warning civilians to evacuate the area.
Attention! Attention! Evacuate the area!
The bombardment from the clouded night sky lasted over 4 hours. This time, United Nations ground forces followed up, sealing off the streets around Aidid's compound. The aim to wipe out his arsenal and his power base. By daylight, Cobra helicopters took up the assault, imposing yet more pressure on Aidid and his followers. Missiles and cannon rounds picked off more ground targets. Bursts of small arms fire clattered among the houses, suggesting some resistance. The gunships tried to flush out snipers. There was no word on casualties. Tanks blocked all escape routes, though it was uncertain whether General Aidid was still in the area. In an exclusive interview at his headquarters just hours before the raid began, General Aidid told ITN he had no intention of giving himself up. He claimed the UN attacks had merely increased his support among Somalis.
Well, I think I'm stronger than any time in the past. I'm a free man. I'm staying in my land. I'm Somali. I'm with my people. Therefore, I'm in a very good position.
The general may not be so confident today. The rooftop where we talked to him has been destroyed. UN troops have seized the headquarters complex and captured a large stock of weapons there. The assault on the man the United Nations blame for most of Somalia's troubles has been relentless. It now seems clear that the UN's intention is not just to cut General Aidid down to size, but to destroy him once and for all as a military and a political force in Somalia.
Now, for perspectives on these latest developments, Mohammed Sanoun is the former UN Special Envoy to Somalia. Robert Oakley was the U.S. envoy to Somalia when American troops were there. He's now a senior advisor to the United States Institute of Peace. Abukar Liban is a retired Somali brigadier general who served as military attaché at the Somali embassy in Washington. Saeed Samatar is a professor of African history at Rutgers University and managing editor of the Horn of Africa Journal. Ambassador Oakley, was the UN's use of force against Aidid the right thing to do?
I think they had no choice once the attack upon the Pakistani troops occurred. It's very unfortunate because it has set back the process of political reconciliation as well as disturbed the process of rebuilding the country and temporarily slowed down the relief operations.
But you feel that the UN had no choice but to go in there, as we just saw, with the helicopter gunships and with the troops?
Well, I'm not going to comment upon the military tactics, but I think there was no choice but to use military force because over the weeks preceding the attack upon the Pakistanis, a lot of weapons have been brought back into Mogadishu in violation of the agreements worked out amongst the Somali leadership with the approval of General Aidid as well as with the United Nations. And so the deliberate attempt to build up force by Aidid's people in Mogadishu in order to challenge the United Nations. And when it erupted, the Pakistanis, the UN had no choice but to respond.
No choice, Mr. Sanoun?
Well, I think it's important to persuade the Somali that this is the right thing to do, not to persuade us or members of the United Nations. I think it's important that the Somali do perceive that it is the right thing to do. And I think that kind of lack of communication and explanation to the Somali environment is not done. And therefore, Aidid might find more support.
So you think there's some validity to his claim that the harder the UN goes after him, the more his support rises?
I believe as long as the Somali do not understand exactly why this is done. You see, this is being done after the incident of the June 5th, after the Pakistani were killed. Many people thought that that operation was undertaken, for instance, to take over the Radio Mogadishu. There was a misunderstanding already. There should have been some kind of explanation. There should have been an investigation. In fact, how come that the Pakistani troops could have been trapped in a small town like Mogadishu, where they have been in operation for months? So there is a gap there, intelligence gap and also political gap. the Somali do not understand exactly what the operation is aimed at. So therefore,
I mean, they don't understand why the UN has gone in there in such force against Adid? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yes, they don't understand exactly why.
Because they don't buy the fact that Adid was responsible for the killing of the 20 Pakistanis.
Right. That should be explained first. That it is that he is responsible, and an argument and proof should be given so that the operation can be accepted by the Somali.
Professor Samatar, what's your view of that?
Well,
You're Somali.
I respectively slightly disagree with Ambassador Sahnoun. I believe that most Somalis understand what this conflict is about. I think that most Somalis will be happy to have Adid off the street, but I do agree with him that the intelligence and political side of that situation has not as fully cultivated as it might have been.
In what way? What's missing? What part of the equation is not there for the Somali people to understand? Professor Samatar.
Well, I think that there should have been a concerted effort to explain to the Somalis, number one, that the United Nations is not coming in to take over their country. Number two, the United Nations has no particular agenda to support one group or another. And three, to reassure the religious community that their country is not threatened with a Christian invasion. Because I think the most dangerous thing that the UN now could face would be if General Adid, for example, persuaded the religious establishment that the country was threatened with a Christian invasion.
Well, let's go back to Adid specifically. Do you believe that with Mr. Sahnoun that there's a possibility that Adid is right when he told the ITN reporter that the harder the UN goes after him, the more his support might go up? Professor Samatar?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Do you agree then that there is a danger that the UN military action could increase Adid's popularity with the Somali people?
I don't believe so. Adid has a small core of followers, namely members of his own lineage. The rest of the Somali population, both in Mogadishu and in the rest of the country, are god-awful tired of him and want to get him off the street.
Well, so what's the problem? And then, if the majority of the Somali people want him gone, then why aren't they cheering the UN on? In other words, to put it very simply.
Well, because the United Nations headquarters, as well as the press establishment, are located right in Adid's neighborhood. Therefore, when you see people coming out, they are coming out in that small portion of Mogadishu where General Adid's headquarters are. If you go to the other parts of the city, to the northern part, I would submit you would find the Somalis cheering this operation.
Yeah. General Liban, how do you feel about this? First of all, is the United Nations handling this right? Should they be going after Adid? Is he the evil force in Somalia that the UN leadership obviously feels that he is?
I completely don't see it that way. First of all, as a Somali, I think the scenes that we have seen today for all the week coming from our capital, Mogadishu, innocent people being killed for no reason, and the bombing and the destruction that followed is an outrageous thing. It's very outrageous to see that, and it's very petrifying to all real Somalis. The other thing that is very worrisome.
Excuse me, you do not believe then that the attack and the killing of the Pakistani soldiers justifies retribution by the United Nations military?
The incident that happened in Mogadishu, which followed the killing of the Pakistanis and a number of Somalis, where no one is mentioning, a number of more Somalis were killed at that day, should have been handled in a more appropriate way, I think, than the UN did. I understand that the UN wants simply to get a pretext to start this operation, and that's what we are witnessing now, today. So the most important thing, I think, in this issue is the role of the UN, who is entrusted to foster and to promote freedom and liberty and the human rights in the world, is today embarked on the most outrageous action that any organization or any group can take on civilian populations. And this is a genocide as we see it. People are, you know, completely, people are getting out of their homes. They are collected or imprisoned for no reason. So many of them now came outside the country. So it looks that this is going to end as a superpower, UN-sponsored ethnic cleansing. And I'm sorry to say that, because the UN cannot do anything about the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, while it is doing the same thing in Somalia.
Pastor Oakley, that's a serious charge.
Well, I agree with Professor Samantar and Ambassador Sanoon that the focus now needs to be very much on communicating with all of the Somali people, all the leaders, not only the faction leaders, but the women, the clan elders, the religious leaders, in order to get the political process back on the track and to put aside this preoccupation of the United Nations against the deed, which has disrupted all the agreements that were reached in Addis on March the 27th. Adid has played a big share in this disruption because, as I said, he's been building up his military force because he feels uncomfortable with this political process. But there has to be a lot more done with communicating with all the Somali leaders, and I think this is the time to do it. I would convoke them as soon as possible. I think Ambassador Howe, Admiral Howe ought to do that as soon as he can, to bring all the Somali leaders together.
Ambassador Howe is the UN Special Representative. He has the job that you used to have, Mr. Stone.
I hope that he will convene all the Somali leadership, as I say, of all stripes, all clans, all types of society, as they had them in Addis Ababa in March, and sit down and start talking about what do we do next, because one has to put the process of bringing Somalia back to life, again, back on the track.
Well, Professor Samantar, what do you make of what General Liban just said, that this is going to be seen by the Somali people as ethnic cleansing, as an outrage, as genocide by the United Nations?
Well, it is a matter of perception. I respect the General's opinion, but I beg to disagree that not all Somalis will see this as a genocide. Because if I did place civilians in the line of fire, I believe that he's more responsible for their deaths than the United Nations.
General?
Well, first of all, I would like to touch briefly on the fact that IDs was hampering all the agreements and he was against all the agreements. I think this notion have no support whatsoever. We know very well that all the agreements that has been signed by ID has been respected by him, and he fulfilled all the agreements. Rather, he was trying to get together as much Somalis as possible. And I think one of the reasons why the UN operation in Somalia and the operation against ID and his supporters came hastily at this last moment is the fact that he invited different factions in Mogadishu, and there was an agreement signed on the 4th of June where there were all the elders and all the representatives from SSDF, which
from
is
what?
the SSDF group, which is from the northeast, from SNDU, and from others also, who were coming together to get a solution of the country.
So he was a man of peace, not a man of war.
He was a man of peace. That is the correct thing. And I have all the evidence to support that. Now, when we talk about the fact that he was the only one who was hampering the agreements and who was destroying the country, I think this is a very distortive notion about the fact that a single man cannot simply rule everything by himself. When you have all the majority, when there is no now what they call intimidation or something like that, you have the UN forces in the country, everything is quiet, no one is armed almost. So how come one only is evil and the others are angels? It's not possible.
Let me ask Mr. Sanoon, the man, Admiral Howe, the man that Ambassador Oakley just referred to, your successor over there, was quoted today as saying that Aidid was a threat to the security of Somalia. Now, we've just heard what the general says. He says, no, no, no. Aidid is a force for peace and was actually bringing the people together. How do you see where the truth lies?
Well, he might be a problem, but so can be other faction chiefs. And in the eyes of the Somali, it's very important that there is an equitable approach, and that if you try to neutralize one warlord or one faction chief, you should do the same for the other. If you want to disarm one faction, you have to disarm all the other factions. Otherwise, if you weaken one faction, put it in a disadvantage, that's a recipe for civil war. I think there should be a thorough demobilization of all factions. And there are other warlords who, in the perception and in the eyes of the Somalis, are even worse. One of them is called the Butcher of Hargeisa. He destroyed the whole city in the north of Somalia. Yet he is there. He moves around. So that's the kind of unjust treatment of the situation which the Somali would very difficultly tolerate.
Make sure that I understand this, then, that you're saying, if I read you correctly, that it's possible, who knows what the truth of the matter is, but it is possible that the United Nations troops have overreacted to what Aidid did in the killing of these 20 Pakistani troops and made him into something that he might not otherwise be, because there are other warlords and other leaders who are also committing atrocities of varying kinds, maybe not as dramatic as that.
Yeah, it is not, the policy has not been consistent. You're dealing with these warlords, you gather them around the table, you have them negotiate, you have them sign a document, you treat them and you enhance their authority in the eyes of the Somali, you enhance their prestige, and then suddenly you pinpoint one of them and you turn against him because there were serious, of course, incidents in Mogadishu, no doubt about it, where this incident would have required an investigation, an explanation that we are going after Aidid because we do have good proof that he is behind it. But if you don't prove it, you don't show it to the Somali, it's going to be counterproductive.
Ambassador Oakley, what's your view of that? Did they move too quickly?
Nope. I don't think so. I think Professor Samantar is right. Most of the Somalis understand this. On the other hand, I agree with Ambassador Sanoon. The time has come to complete the disarmament program. That's what wasn't done. There was a program in place that's been in place for weeks that has not been carried out. Instead, things have been going the other way. There have been more arms brought into Mogadishu, but CNN this morning had a very interesting live broadcast of 30,000 Somalis in North Mogadishu demonstrating in favor of the United Nations.
Yeah. So the point being that don't get too hung up on Aidid, but isn't the UN the one that's hung up on Aidid?
I say Aidid and the UN have both got fixated on each other, but the time has come, as Sanoon says, to move to a much broader program of disarmament. At the same time, one brings them all together and starts talking about the political future and gets the political process back in motion.
Yeah. Professor Samatari, is that what should be done now, that somehow try to get the attention off of Aidid rather than to pursue him and catch him and then do something with him, which apparently is the strategy at this point?
Well, in a sense, General Aidid has brought this attention on himself. After all, when he, from what I understand, ordered the killing of more than 23 UN peacekeepers, he should have known that this was a matter that he should not have undertaken lightly. But on the other hand, I do agree with Ambassador Sanoon and Ambassador Oakley that what is needed now is to deal in some way with the other warlords. I don't think that it should appear to the Somalis that Aidid has been selectively targeted. And moreover, if he is sufficiently weakened, I feel that his own followers should be protected, because there are people around in Mogadishu who want to get their hands on his followers.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much, all four of you.
Next tonight, the Senate's new budget package and three differing Senate views about its merits and drawbacks. This new set of taxes and spending cuts faces several hurdles still and possible changes before it goes into effect. Our Capitol Hill correspondent Kwame Holman has this backgrounder.
Today's action by the Senate Finance Committee was a mere formality. The new package of tax increases and spending cuts, called a reconciliation bill, was approved during closed-door meetings yesterday. With all 9 Republicans on the committee generally opposed to the plan, Chairman Daniel Patrick Moynihan needed unanimous agreement from the 11 committee Democrats, and he got it.
This is a large measure, as all of you here will know.
The Senate bill is similar to the bill passed in the House, in that it raises the top income tax rate from 31 to 36% and raises the top corporate rate from 34 to 35%. And it repeals the 10% luxury tax on expensive yachts, planes, furs, and jewelry, but not automobiles. But the Senate bill differs from the House version in that it raises taxes on Social Security benefits for those couples earning more than $40,000 a year and individuals earning $32,000. The House version would tax the benefits of more recipients, couples earning at least $32,000 and individuals earning $25,000. The Senate bill also includes a 4.3 cents a gallon tax increase on gasoline and other transportation fuels that is expected to raise $25 billion over 5 years. The House bill contains the broad-based energy tax called the BTU tax that was based on heat content and expected to raise $72 billion over 5 years. The Senate bill's lower tax is made up in part by deeper reductions in Medicare, $69 billion in savings over 5 years compared to $50 billion in the House version. It was the debate over balancing higher energy taxes and deeper cuts in entitlement programs that divided committee Democrats for weeks. This morning, they all claimed victory, but said finding the middle ground wasn't easy.
I mean, it was easier when we were in the Congress with President Reagan because he asked us to cut taxes, which everybody was happy to do, at least the majority. And he asked us to spend more money, and most members of Congress said, I can handle that. Let's spend more money, and let's cut taxes. Problem is, as a result of that, we have a $4 trillion long-term debt and a $350 billion deficit. It's getting worse each year.
What we have come up with, I think, is a dramatic improvement over what we were sent by the House. No BTU tax, no barge tax, the largest package of deficit reduction that has ever come before the Congress, and in fact, more spending cuts than tax increases.
For their part, the Republicans on the committee wore oversized name tags, a reminder of their charge they were left out of the decision-making process.
Democrats may not remember us. We are on the... we are members of this committee, and Senator Danforth thought it might be well to identify ourselves. In case you've lost touch, we're on your... I get your newsletter, and I appreciate it very much.
But although he participated in the good-natured dig, Senator John Danforth of Missouri said he was deeply disturbed by the lack of Republican participation in formulating the reconciliation bill.
This is a nightmare to me. This is exactly the way we should not be functioning. I know that we indicated to the administration and to you, Mr. Chairman, that Republicans weren't players. You indicated to us that you were going to do it by yourself. But I think that the result is to create legislation which is not balanced.
The reconciliation bill now goes on to the Senate floor, where it faces amendments by both Republicans and Democrats. It's likely many more negotiations will be required to keep the plan moving toward a presidential signature.
Will the Senate tax compromise hold? In a moment, we'll hear from the Senate's key supporter of the compromise, Majority Leader George Mitchell. First, we hear the views of two critics, Democrat Howard Metzenbaum of Ohio and Missouri Republican John Danforth. Senator Danforth is also a member of the Senate Finance Committee, and we just heard from him. Senator Danforth, a few weeks ago, when Senator Boren proposed a compromise, you were one of the two Republicans who supported him. This compromise is good enough for him. Why isn't it good enough for you?
Well, this is a far cry from what Senator Boren and I were talking about a few weeks ago. This really is not a balanced proposal. This is very heavily a tax increase proposal, and it does not do the one thing that Senator Boren and I felt should be done, and that is to control the rapid growth of entitlement programs. I don't think there is any effective and responsible way of dealing with the budget deficit unless we can cap the growth of the entitlements. This program does not do that. For that reason, I think that it really does not serve the purposes of effectively dealing with the economic problems of this country.
So you'll vote against it?
I will vote against it.
In the committee and when it goes to the full Senate. Would you rather, suppose this is, when it finally comes through the mill, through the conference with the House, this is the most deficit reduction that is politically possible given this Congress and this president, is it still in the national interest to see, would you think, to see it defeated rather than that much deficit reduction passed?
Yes, I think it is, because even under this program, even by the accounts of the people who are supporting it, it's a very short-term reduction in the deficit. It still leaves very large deficits, over $200 billion a year. And then in 1998, because we haven't dealt with the entitlement problem, the deficit goes shooting right back up again. I think that really the worst disservice to the country is to create the impression that we're asking the American people to do something serious, that we're calling for real sacrifice on the part of the people, and then turn around and say, well, when it comes to spending, it's really not spending that affects you. When it comes to taxes, it's somebody else who's going to be taxed, it's not you. That really is the same old stuff we've been doing for a very long period of time, and I think that the best service we can perform for the people of this country is to be realistic, to tell them that there is no painless way of dealing with the budget deficit, and that the entitlements must be controlled.
You're saying this is a hoax, in other words?
Yes, I really do think it's a hoax. Not to say that it doesn't do damage, because it does. I think the tax increases are going to backfire. They are not going to produce the revenue that is projected to be produced. But I think it is a hoax in that it tells people that it's a painful solution, and it really is not, other than for a fraction of the population. As far as the spending programs, they are going to proceed apace. The entitlement programs are going to go up from 53% of the budget to 69% of the budget 10 years from now. There is no programmatic way of dealing with it. We hit the providers a little bit, but as far as the programs themselves, we really don't deal with them. We say, well, let's put that off until the future, mañana, deal with it when we've decided how to spend whatever we save on the health care program. I don't think that is responsible, and I do think that the word hoax effectively describes the situation.
Senator Metzenbaum, I know you have a different source of unhappiness with this compromise, but before we get to that, how do you respond to Senator Danforth calling the whole package a hoax?
Well, I don't think it's a hoax. I think that Senator Moynihan and his committee had a very difficult problem, a very difficult challenge. They had some recalcitrants on the committee, and they had to try to fashion a package that where they could get a majority of the committee in order to bring the bill to the floor. I think they did yeoman work. I think they did a very, very good job, notwithstanding the fact that I have some specific reservations about some portions of the bill that they have brought to the floor, or that we'll be bringing to the floor, and I hope that we can achieve some modifications of those particular provisions. But on the whole, to get a $500 billion deficit reduction over a period of 5 years, which is in accordance with the President's wishes, and I think is in accordance with what the country wants, I think they're to be commended, notwithstanding the fact, as I say, that I have some specific concerns, and I hope that those can be addressed before the bill hits the floor.
Well, let's address them right now. What makes you unhappy about this compromise?
I'm unhappy about the fact that there's an additional $19 billion in Medicare cuts, and I'm also very, very unhappy about the fact that there's a new provision in the bill that is not in the law now, permitting the deduction of goodwill. We are talking about a totally new concept in the law, and there is a Supreme Court decision that had to do with a part of that problem, but not the totality of it. And the committee went far too far as permitting the deduction of goodwill.
I don't understand the deduction of goodwill.
Well, goodwill is, let's say you have a company that has $100 billion in net worth. And it has $20 billion in machinery and equipment and supplies. And $80 billion of the company's net worth is just goodwill. For we have never permitted the depreciation or the write-off of goodwill going back to 1927.
So you think this is a giveaway to business, do you?
It is a tremendous giveaway. It will make it possible for many more takeovers to occur because the takeover artists will be able to depreciate goodwill, and it will cost about $10 billion a year, which is not reflected in the figures that are before the committee now. As a matter of fact, the way the figures are reflected at the moment, it would appear as if we're going to pick up some money, like $5 billion over the 5-year period, but I think we'll actually lose something in the area of $50 billion over the 5-year period by permitting the depreciation of goodwill. And I know the views that I am presently expressing are the same views that a number of other Democrats in the Senate have about this piece of legislation.
Let me come back to your point about the additional $19 billion cuts in Medicare on top of the $50 billion that the administration had already made. That was apparently necessary to forge this compromise to compensate for the much lower revenues because your committee, or the committee, wouldn't buy the BTU tax or a broad-range energy
There was
tax.
another alternative, and that is they could have had the 36% corporate tax rate, which is the maximum tax rate that they provide in the bill for individuals, instead of the 35% maximum corporate rate. That is not a high rate as compared to other countries throughout the world. 36% would not be. I think that they should have gone to the 36% rate. That would have picked up, I think, about $15 billion of the $19 billion each year that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you the same question I did from another point of view, Senator Danforth. Assuming this is the best deficit reduction package this Congress can produce when it's finally agreed with the House, is it better to swallow your unhappiness with it and pass it, or more in the national interest not to?
My feeling is that we're going to sit down and hopefully with the leadership of the Senate, Senator Mitchell is about to speak when we get through, see whether we can work out some modification of the presently pending legislation. Just because the committee brought it to the floor doesn't mean that has to be the final product. And we'll decide at a subsequent point as to whether or not we'll vote for or against the bill. But I'm saying to you that I would like to vote for the bill. I think most of the other Democrats with whom I've been speaking would like to vote for the bill, but we're having some difficulty with some specific provisions. There are others besides the goodwill provision that I've addressed myself to.
Senator Danforth, assuming this goes through the Senate in something like this form, it's still got to go back to the House. Budget Director Panetta was predicting today that the President is going to put the heat on for another attempt at some compromise towards the broad-based energy tax. In other words, if you're unhappy with this bill, how are you going to feel about the bill that comes back from the House or from the conference?
Well, it's very bad, but it could get worse, and I think it will get worse. I think that Director Panetta is probably correct, that what is done in conference is going to make this even a worse bill than it is now. I don't like the present form of the energy tax. I don't like it because it taxes transportation. It taxes the airline industry to the tune of $2.5 billion over the next 5 years. This is an industry that now is hanging on by its fingernails. Airlines are in bankruptcy or on the brink of bankruptcy. This is as recent as this morning's newspaper. I don't think it makes sense to try to extract another $2.5 billion from the airline industry. But yes, it is possible to make the situation even worse by going back to the BTU tax. I wish we had a program that did not rely so heavily on taxes. I wish we had a program that did a better job of controlling spending. That is what this program does not do.
Senator Metzenbaum, am I right in thinking that from your point of view, what might come back from the House conference would be a bill more to your liking?
That's entirely possible. I think that there is a good chance that the House will not accept the idea of additional $19 billion in cuts in Medicare. I think that there are other areas where the House might cause the bill to be modified much more to my liking, and I hope that it will. I believe that we have an obligation to pass this legislation. I think that the President's program is in the right direction, a $500 billion deficit reduction over 5 years. I want very much for him to succeed. I want the Congress to succeed, and more importantly than all, I want the American economy to succeed, and I think therefore we need this tax bill, but that doesn't mean that, as I've already indicated, some provisions of it are very distasteful to me, and I hope that we'll be able to modify them.
Senator Mitchell, the majority leader, let's go to you now. Is there going to be room to do amendments to this bill on the floor?
Well, very few bills ever emerge from the Senate precisely in the form which they begin consideration. It's in the nature of deliberations in the Senate. I'm aware of the objections which Senator Metzenbaum has just stated here. He stated them previously to me and to others, and we'll obviously try to work with him and many others. You can't write a bill that perfectly satisfies 100 senators, obviously, because their views conflict, as we've just seen here, very sharply conflicting views on the legislation. But we're going to try to pass it as nearly intact as we can. But I don't, obviously never would rule out the possibility that there'll be some change during consideration by the Senate.
But you have the votes to pass a bill more or less like the one that's come out of the committee, do you think?
I believe it will pass, Robin, but I don't know what amendments are going to be offered, and so it's impossible to predict precisely what will occur. As you know, in the Senate, unlike the House, anyone can offer any amendment anytime they want. So there's an unrestricted right of amendment, and no notice need be given of the amendment. So often, in fact, usually, I find out what's in an amendment after it's been offered. You have to make a judgment at that time on what to do, but as of now, I believe we will pass it, or something like this.
Senator, you heard Senator Danforth call this bill essentially, well, I suggested it, but he agreed with it, a hoax in its promise of deficit reduction because it does not slow down the growth in entitlement programs.
Well, of course, it does do that, and that's what Senator Metzenbaum then objected to. I don't think it's a hoax, and I regret the use of that term because I think it really overstates the case. I think the real hoax, and I want to make clear I don't include Senator Danforth in this, is those who constantly give speeches about reducing the deficit, but then won't vote to reduce the deficit. There's a vast gap in public policy between word and deed, rhetoric and action. And you will find, if you go back over the past few years, that those who give the loudest and most passionate speeches against the deficit are usually the ones who confine their activity to speeches and then won't vote for actual deficit reduction. There's always some little part of it that they don't like. Well, gee, if you just change this, if you just change that, if you just change the other, I might vote for it, but I really can't vote for this. Now, that's the real hoax that's been perpetrated on the American people. The reality is, if we're going to get deficit reduction, there's got to be a combination of tax increases and spending cuts. That's what this bill does. $260 billion reducing expenditures, $248 billion in taxes, every dollar of those taxes going to reducing the deficit. And that's what we've got to pass if we're going to have any meaningful deficit reduction, because there is no viable or credible alternative. The real choice, indeed the only choice, is this package or no package, this deficit reduction or no deficit reduction.
Since no Republicans are apparently going to vote for this bill in the Senate, has the process of helping the president's program forward been helped by the intervention of Senator Bohr and some other conservatives who have modified this package, or have they hurt and wounded the process?
We had to get a consensus among 11 Democrats on the Finance Committee, which we did. Now we have to get it among 50 or more members of the Senate as a whole. It always involves, in a democratic society, and this is a representative democracy, an exchange of views. Not everyone agrees. That's in the nature of our system, and you have to broaden the base to get that package which will attract the needed majority votes. I regret the fact that the Republicans have indicated they won't support the package. None of them. Not one of them voted for the budget resolution. Not one of them will vote for the budget. They're on easy street. They're for more spending cuts in the abstract, but they're against these spending cuts. They say they want, it's got to be tough medicine, but they're against all the tax increases, and of course that's the tough medicine.
Just briefly, given that it's got to go through the Senate and then back from the House in conference and everything, when did you imagine the taxpayers and businesses and accountants and all the rest of the people out there waiting for the uncertainties to end, when would they know for sure?
In July.
In July.
I think the Senate will pass it next week. There then has to be a conference between the House and Senate to reconcile the two versions that then goes back to both houses to be signed by the President. I think that will occur in July.
Senator Mitchell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, the major stories of this Thursday. President Clinton told a primetime news conference the military action in Somalia was over and a success. He also said the United States would accept the division of Bosnia into 3 ethnic zones if all parties agreed. On the U.S. economy, he called for Congress to pass his deficit reduction plan. And the head of the FDA dismissed tampering reports of Pepsi cans, saying none had been verified. We'll see you tomorrow night here on the NewsHour. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo.